I am Shweta Shirvastav, a student of the Department of Art History and Art Appreciation, third semester. It is my great pleasure and privilege to be standing here to extend warm welcome to all our guests and to thank each one for coming to this public lecture. This is part of Jamia Talimi Mela, an educational festival organized by the university. Talimi Mela is an occasion when each student is invited to participate and importantly help to organize and to conduct events. The students also organized various stalls, and in the evening everyone gets together to enjoy music, dance and drama. Talimi Mela becomes a lead motive which engages the whole university, the teachers, the students and people living around it. And it is my honor to say a few words of introduction to Professor Y.S. Alone on this occasion. Professor Alone is an alumnus of the Department of Art History and Aesthetics, Faculty of Fine Arts, MS University, Baroda. He further studied MPhil in Ancient History at Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He obtained PhD from Center for Historical Studies, JNU, on forms and patronage in early Buddhist art and architecture, a study of early Western Indian Buddhist caves. Presently, he is a professor in visual studies at School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU. He has published several research papers in journals and chapters in edited volumes on ancient Indian art and are a critic of Walter Spring, the American scholar of Ajanta caves and Buddhist caves in Western India. He is a critic of modern Indian art, popular Neo-Buddhist visual culture. He has published numerous research papers on the interpretative framework of Dr. Ambedkar and social sciences. He has been involved in the writing of art exhibition catalogues as a point of departure to critique the idea of meta-narratives within modernity and tracing the differences therein. Professor Alone has lectured widely at many places in the country and outside, including Shenzhen University, Dunhuang Research Academy, Buddhist Research Institute, Hangzhou, China. He has been advisor of NCERT textbook on History of Art for class 11th. Professor Alone is a member of editorial board for the Journal of South Asian Archaeology, Ancient Asia. Professor Alone's book, Early Western Indian Buddhist Caves, Forms and Patronage, will soon be launched somewhere next month. He has been engaged in popular lectures as part of initiating progressive social movements. May I now invite Professor Alone to deliver his lecture, Interrogating Interface, Protected Ignorance and Politics of Representation.
I must say that it is not something which I am presenting afresh, rather this is something which is an ongoing research, and I have lectured this particular component at several places, and nevertheless I hope you enjoy as much as I enjoy giving those lectures. So, what one has to really understand is the intellectual politics of hegemony that emerged in colonial India. So, one really has to take into account as to how this project of homogeneity has emerged in the imperial context, and then how it produced certain hegemonic knowledge system that has overpowered our ideas and interpretations over a period of time. And revivalism was also part of such project homogeneity, and though it was a systemic opposition to the colonial interpretations and colonial cultural hegemony, but in reality it was creating another native hegemony which was very much in place, which was very much in vogue, and the entire interpretative realm created monologues. So the monologues have emerged out of power and authority to interpret. Then the Brahminical thought process produced the monologues of homogeneity of theoretical traditions that resulted in interpreting the Buddhist tradition as an offshoot of the Vedic Hinduism. And this is just, I am citing just one example as to how the whole idea of project homogeneity really becomes a problematic paradigm in order to understand even the non-Brahminic traditions or the non-Vedic traditions. Radhakrishnan observes, the great Radhakrishnan, so called, Buddhism was an offshoot of the more ancient faith of the Hindus, perhaps a schism or heresy, while the fundamentals of metaphysics and ethics, the Buddha agreed with the faith he inherited, he protested against certain practices which were in vogue at that time. Thus, one can read and understand as to how Radhakrishnan understood certain philosophical tradition from a very normative Brahmanical interpretations. Radhakrishnan's views tend to homogenize religion and transport it to a transcendental plane. There is a misconception of homogenizing the word nirvana. Now I am citing you one example. Originally it is a nibbana, which is a Buddhist Pali word, and the nirvana is a Sanskrit word which comes in the Brahmanical philosophy through the through Buddhism. Thus, appropriation becomes uncritical inference associated with knowledge production process. I mean, without really seeing, without understanding the original meaning of the term, and without understanding its implications, it has been appropriated without any uncritical inference, without any critical inference. Within the realm of historical narrative, mystic and mythic become part of production of knowledge. Now let us see one of the example of textual tradition related with the event of life of the Buddha, which is closely associated with his renunciation. Now this is a Sanchi relief which shows the great departure, that is the Buddha leaving home, and what one notices is that he is living in front of everyone. He is living in front where the entire Kapilavastu is witnessing. Now this particular account, this particular relief is dated to 1st century BC, and the textual account we get in the 2nd century AD text called Buddha Charita. So it completely defies this whole idea that he left home in the middle of the night, which we are always tutored, which we are always doctrinated right from our childhood. And that particular component comes from the Nidan Katha. But what is important is that instead of reading the text in a critical manner, we read the text at a face value and try to interpret and always propagate those things. So that becomes a very extremely problematic process, because it creates a wrong kind of ideas, it generates wrong kind of understandings. The other important event that has been mystified is the event of enlightenment. Now, as if enlightenment is something which has happened suddenly. It's all nonsense. He left home at the age of 28 and he got enlightenment at the age of 33. See, there is a whole process that went on for 5 years. He went on studying, doing lot of things, and then he arrives at certain things. He differs with Kapil's Sankhya philosophy. And then he arrives at the theory of Pratyuta Samutpada. So that is how the enlightenment process is. But then we are always told, he sat under the tree and then one day he got enlightenment. Is it possible you sit under the tree and you get enlightenment? So really one has to question those ideas. Enlightenment need not be read as mystic event, as there are series of events related to it, and how his understanding grows by a series of questioning and dialogues. It's an event of establishment and realization of theory of dependent origination. In the textual tradition as well as in pictorial tradition, victory over Mara gets heavily emphasized. However, one has to understand the metaphor of the Mara. Mara should not be understood as a historical event, but it is a personification of the state of mind of the Buddha that he himself goes under during his search for the explaining phenomenon of world. Thus, Mara becomes a metaphor equated with the Brahmanical Vedism in terms of obstacles to realization of theory of dependent origination. What Buddha establishes in the philosophical term is very important. That is, Buddha's philosophical contribution was Pratyuta Samutpada, that is theory of dependent origination or theory of interdependent origination, or it is also called as codependent origination. Now there are important things that which I take from the Buddhist philosophy, apart from basing my logic on the theory of Pratita Samutpad. Now there is this whole Panchaskanda, that is Pancha Jnanendriya, which exists in the Buddhist philosophy, and it says that how the perception is made and how you read certain things. So there is this Panchaskanda in mind consciousness that is called Manovidnyan, and Manas that gave rise to and is the support of the mind consciousness. Then there is something called store consciousness, that is Alaya Vijnana, which is the ground or base of the seven consciousness. Thus, such theoretical conception tool become part of analysis of mind and perception and become integral part of the theory of Pratita Samutpad, the dependent origination. Any act or action is stemmed out of the mind consciousness. So perception is both physical and mental. Ignorance is addressed as reason or problem within that can only be killed by knowledge. Thus, knowledge constitutes a fundamental necessity, condition, not only to kill ignorance but also to facilitate mind consciousness for better inferences. As the object of perception is not a reality in itself but an image we have created. Say, for example, in India, the image of a Muslim society has been stereotyped. It has been created over a period of time. The image of a tribals has been created in a very stereotyped manner, which becomes a mental image. The image or the ideas with regard to the scheduled caste communities have been created over a period of time, which becomes your mental images, which becomes your mental formulations. Manifestation of image brings us to the idea of representation. As the object of mind is thinking or ideas or imaginations, its resultant category is a mind consciousness. How do we then understand the mind consciousness? Can it be construed and related with different sets of inferences that the mind consciousness has produced and then interrogate the category of ignorance in the contemporary context? In the context of politics of textual and theoretical tradition, the idea of homogeneity and that of philosophical persuasions produced a trivial understanding. One of the best examples to explain such trivial nature of cognition and meaning process stemmed out of the normative Brahmanical understanding is the word nirvana. The word nirvana has its genesis in the Buddhist Pali term nibbana. The Pali term for the word nirvana is nibbana. Nibbana means cessation of anger, hate, desires, whereas parinibbana means death, and mahaparinibbana is a word used for the death of the Buddha. The term nirvana in the Brahmanical tradition or Hindu religion comes from the Buddhist tradition. It is found mentioned for the first time in the Brahmanical Hinduism text called Bhagavad Gita that shows how the Bhagavad Gita was a text compiled after the rise of Buddhism and no pre-Buddhist antiquity can be attached with it. Or to be very precisely, you have Badrayan's Dharma Sutra, and in that Badrayan's Dharma Sutra we do find Gita. The Brahmanical meaning of the term nirvana is salvation, that is moksha or atma ki mukti or salvation of soul. Thus, the Buddhist term and the Brahmanical Hindu term are considerably different in their meanings and understandings. Nibbana is an essential element in the Buddhist practices because the goal of Buddhism is that of eradicating sorrow. Thus, both the terms are located in different theoretical positions, but under the politics of homogeneity, it is always deemed as one entity. Thus, cognition becomes a very questionable process because it also has baggage of tradition as well as the ideas that are extremely driven by normative realm of belief and governed by the ideas of appropriated modern understandings. However, important question is how do we address ignorance? One of the basic means to contradict and confront ignorance is prajna, that is knowledge. Thus, knowledge becomes essential means as well as effective means to contradict and confront. Knowledge is fundamental and ignorance can only be killed by the means of knowledge. It is generally argued that rational and irrational are relative. However, it may be observed that despite the fact that rational and irrational are relative, but its relativeness depends on its objectives. For example, any irrationality in terms of existence of ignorance get protected and explained within the accepted belief system as part of normative. Thus, one will have to interrogate the very knowledge production process and its interconnectedness not mere as autonomous entity, but the basis of objectives and its organized mental images or perceptions or formations created over a period of time. Imperative here is to think how body of ignorance can be created and what are the features of such body. Why do texts always make us to think and believe whatever is said in the text? Like we get so much carried away by reading certain text and we do not come out of the text. Now why it happens? I'll just give you one good example. In the Hindu mythology, there is a myth called Lingodbhav, and where there is a dispute between Shiva and Vishnu, and there is a dispute between Brahma and Vishnu, and both fight for their own supremacy. And the Shiva comes and says, "Okay, fine, I will test it what it is," and he erects his phallus and asks Brahma to find out the top and the Vishnu the base, and both go. So Brahma goes up, Vishnu goes down by becoming boar, and the Brahma by becoming swan. And after number of years or some time, they come back and say, we cannot find the top and we cannot find bottom. So you are the great. So it is like this, in the sense that you remain within the text, you don't want to come out of it. So that is how the texts are constructed these days. That is how the texts are written these days. And that clearly directs you not to come out of the text, not to have any critical inference of the text, but rather it wants you to read the text as Shabda Pramanya. Ignorance is multifold. Often mysticism, mythic, belief in supernatural, belief in soul, belief in heaven, belief in divinity all become center of systemic expositions. Such expositions are ignorance that can only be confronted and interrogated by knowledge. Knowledge has to be right knowledge. It is again a very relative category and also a fluid category because of nature of conditional inferences and how mana and mind consciousness become operative part of understanding that can also be based on abstract imagination. See, I am not against abstraction, I am not against metaphysics. What I am trying to say is that if the objective of the abstraction is to kill ignorances, it becomes a righteous abstraction. If the objective of the metaphysics is to kill ignorances, it becomes a righteous metaphysics. But if the objective of the abstraction and the metaphysics is not to kill ignorances, rather to maintain ignorances, then it is irrighteous metaphysics and abstraction, and therefore it becomes a protected ignorance. Righteousness is not a degree of evaluation, but a standard of evaluation based on the principle of the dependent origination and becomes an analytical tool to unfold phenomenon of interwoven thought process transformed into certain field of signifiers produced over a period of time. Now, there is an interesting argument by John Rawls, who is known for his radical theory of justice, and he talks about veil of ignorance, and in that he analyzes as to how a person who is signing a contract may not be knowing what is there, but he is signing. So he says it is a veil of ignorance. My argument about is very different, and which I am going to explain you. Propagation of divinity, mysticism, mythical ideas, divinity, etc. are elements related to ignorance, and its deliberate propagation becomes the idea of protected ignorance. Protected ignorance is a part of grand mythical tradition and exists in the modern world. I'll tell you just one simple example. A professor of physics gets up in the morning and pours water to sun, despite knowing the fact that the water never goes to sun. This is the fantastic example of protected ignorance. I think I can't give you any more example. Another example I would like to give you in recent times, say for example, our Prime Minister declared in one of the science congress that we had a great plastic surgery and he gave the example of Ganesh. Now this is another fantastic example of protected ignorance. Any knowledge formation process needs to be interrogated from its objectives and critical conceptual formulations. The concept of protected ignorance can also be understood by image tradition in modern India. Now, there are some contemporary painters in India who were moved by the Buddhist ideas and refused to be part of dogmatic nationalistic meta-narratives and philosophical discourse. Savi Savarkar painted Foundation of India based on the fourfold division of the Brahminical Hindu society, that is Foundation of India. The top shows the Brahmin, the weapons representing arms showing a warrior class, and pot-bellied as the class of traders and wealthy, and the feet as the lowermost servile class. The lowermost are the untouchable communities who are represented by the feet with bale garland. Bale feet were social code infested on untouchable community by the Hindu religious polity. The block of the untouchable is walking away from the fourfold division of the society and going towards Buddhism, an event that happened in modern India on 14th October 1956 when more than 500,000 people got converted to Buddhism at Nagpur in central India under the leadership of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was an intellectual of par excellence India has ever produced and an architect of Indian constitution. I say so because Ambedkar was the first person in 20th century India who presented the critique of the imperial discourses, the Brahminical discourses, as well as the Marxian discourses. Another work by Savi Savarkar which shows the destruction of the foundation of India by the Buddha's Dhammachakra. Now, I move on to Gandhi. Gandhi has been the most celebrated figure in India and abroad. However, nobody bothers to read contradictions in Gandhi and his ideas. Gandhi's ideas are deeply rooted in the fundamentalist Hindu religion. There is a consistency in maintaining the figure of Gandhi in a celebrative mode. It can be exemplified by some illustrative examples. Now, see, what we are always told, oh, Bapu was a great person, oh, Bapu did this, Bapu did that. So, we attribute all our freedom struggle to Gandhi. No doubt Gandhi was important in colonial India or struggle against the Britishers. But do we see the contradictions in Gandhi? Why do you want to celebrate Gandhi? Even the feminists would like to celebrate Gandhi, and I really wonder why do they want to celebrate, because there are tremendous contradictions in Gandhi. Gandhi was sleeping with young girls, sleeping naked, and he was caught by his own secretary. And then he says, oh, I'm following my brahmacharya, tapacharya, something, that is what he defended. There are a number of contradictions in Gandhi. And when I explain those contradictions to likes of Akbar Padamsi, who painted this Gandhi, he said, no, Bapu cannot do something like this, Bapu cannot think something like this. I said, it's nonsense. Because you people are indoctrinated so much that you do not want to read the contradictions in Gandhi, because the contradictions in Gandhi are tremendous. Say for example, I'll just give you one example. During the non-cooperation movement, Gandhi directs the peasants that you should not give your lagan to the Britishers. But he says that you should do whatever you are supposed to do as far as your landlord is concerned. Now let me tell you, if you are against oppression, if you are against suppression, then you should be opposed to anyone who is an oppressor. Now Gandhi was not against the native oppressor, he was only against the British oppressors. So that clearly shows hypocritic position of Gandhi. Can then Gandhi be a person who who can give you equality, who can really give you liberty, who can really empower you with the idea of fraternity. There is another problem with Gandhi. Say, for example, the secularism which you talk about today, and so much Gandhi gets eulogized. The Gandhi's idea of secularism operates within the fold of hegemonic Hinduism. It does not empower you the equity that the minorities should remain under the control of the Hindus, and they don't have the equal rights, they don't have the same equity. That is where the problem comes. So one has to really understand this whole point of contradictions in Gandhi, and then how the painters have eulogized Gandhi in their pictorial depictions. Now, this is very contradictory in nature, especially this one, Debanjan Roy's Gandhi. But contradictions too are in a celebrity mode and eulogizes the protagonist. Another one is Gopal Swami Khitanchis, which was based on Parzania poster, and you can really make out that how the Gandhi gets eulogized, but the Gujarat riots, I mean, if Gandhi was so important and people were so much moved by the Gandhian ideas, then why the riots took place in Gujarat, why Gujarat has been the hotbed of anti-reservation agitations, and why if Gandhism was so much powerful and effective means, then why there are so many communal riots and the hate that is going on in the country. There is another image of Gandhi we are saying is give peace a chance. Now this is by Vishal Dhar. I mean, was really Gandhi talking about peaceful things? Gandhi accepts communal award for the Muslims, but Gandhi opposes same communal award to the scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes. So you need to see these contradictions in Gandhi. Then Sudhanshu Sutar, who makes Gandhi very differently and shows like how difficult path Gandhi had where he had to walk such a difficult things. And his contention that he being from the gardener community, and when Gandhi was shot, the gardener who was there in that premises was the first one to catch Gandhi's body and lifted his body. So that is the kind of attachment he wants to show. But the gardener community person in India does not want to see the great person they have produced, that is Mahatma Phule. So one has to really understand as to how you read certain images, and also how your mental formulations which have been created over a period of time always restrict you to see the things, understand the things very critically. And that is why the knowledge production process becomes extremely trivial and remains a project of protected ignorance. These are some of the examples. Painters' contentions are based on the idea of Hindu nationalistic meta-narratives of the hegemonic Hindu society that has been created over a period of time. It's an apt example of protected ignorance because none of these painters have attempted to see Gandhi critically. Now here we have another example. Now this is by Ramkinkar Baez. This is the first pictorial critique of Gandhi. Let me tell you, this was made sometime in 55. And he dared to show skull under the feet of Gandhi. And he said in the documentary, which was made by Ritvik Ghatak, that Gandhi became Mahatma by killing people, by crushing people. And that is how he represented that the skull under the feet of Gandhi. This is the first pictorial critique of Gandhi. And no modernist painter ever tried to see Gandhi critically. Rather, whether it is Hussain, whether it is Akbar Padamsi, whether it is Atul Dodiya, whether it is any painter for that matter, they always elogize Gandhi rather than seeing Gandhi very critically. Then, in a recent time, J. Nandakumar dared to paint Gandhi by challenging the very idea of Gandhi as a figure of Mahatma. He painted Gandhi as killer. Gandhi with multiple heads, emerging with killing of an untouchable, occupies centrality of pictorial space. His walking stick is converted into a spear and a lance, piercing into the body of an untouchable, signifying how political rights of the untouchable community was destroyed by Gandhi in colonial India. J. Kumar's work are representative of the killing of the ignorance by pictorial means, thus protected ignorance becomes an idea of critique. Now, not many people are really aware of what was the Pune Karar, what was the Pune Pact. It was all about the having two votes, that a person will, there is a constituency, and the constituency will be represented by one general candidate where everybody will vote, and then there will be a candidate by the scheduled caste and scheduled scheduled tribe community who will be voted by that community itself. So that was the separate electorate idea. Now there is another work he created, that is this Puttapatti Sai Baba, and he is standing in front of the two symbols of economic empowerment, economic power, that is bull and ram, which are there right in front of the stock exchange. So and he painted this before his death. And after the death of Sai Baba, you might have read in newspapers that how much wealth has come out of his bedroom. So the spirituality is all about amassing wealth rather than spreading any kind of a humanitarian message, or for that matter spreading or talking about equality, or working for equality, or working for fraternity, or working for liberty. There is another sculpture by Prajapati who deliberately choosing image of Gandhi on the currency note on skull synonym to ghost, and Gandhi's affinity as Baniya and skull as capitalist ghost. It's a very interesting image he made. Then there is this sculpture by Prajapati showing Arthi on the surface of the currency and symbols used at the time of cremation at Ganga Ghat in Varanasi. It's a visual critique of the belief system nurtured over a period of time and an example of protected ignorance. You might have seen Manikarni Ghat, which is very well known in Ganga at Varanasi, where the dead bodies are burned. And what he has done is that he made the currency note bed here. And that's a very potent critique of how really one goes by the tradition, how one is governed by those belief systems where you do not think very rationally. There is another work, Remembering Pandita Ramabai by Shukla Sawant, and very interesting work this is. There are Caesar symbols, then there are those symbols of the Arthi which has been used. And Pandita Ramabai was a great person who was a Brahmin lady and who became Christian in the late 19th century India, and also wrote a critique of Manu. This is another work she did. And then now I move on to this work by Mansur Ali, who is now practicing in Delhi, and it shows the alliance, like how it is so difficult for a different political powers to come together and rule, and what a coalition politics is all about, how difficult it is, and how it becomes a big jugglery in order to run the coalition government, and in order to have a political coexistence. Now this is another work which is done by Mansur Ali. He titled it as the Jugaad technology. And when you sit and you move, it is so difficult to do this balancing act. Now this balancing act is a political satire, and we had a coalition government, and I think probably Dr. Manmohan Singh would be the most appropriate person as to who can share his experiences of how he really had to do all kinds of balancing acts. After seeing this image, one really notices how Mansur's ideas were so much gets triggered by the then existing political scenario. Now I move on to a very different example, statue of Manu in the premises of Rajasthan High Court. Now can you imagine, the Indian constitution is anti-Manu, and the judiciary in India, they went on installing statue of Manu in the High Court premises, and neither the Supreme Court judges nor anybody really talks about it, nor they give any standing order to remove it. This is the pathetic situation of the judiciary in this country. What can you expect from such a judiciary in this country? So you can see that Rajasthan High Court is a building, Rajasthan Uच्च न्यायालय, and in front of it, this is statue of Manu. Now here we have a different Manu by Savi Savarkar, who paints Manu as a Nazi fellow, as a nasty fellow, as a dirty fellow, and rejected Manu like anything, and all his pictorial critique emanates from Ambedkar's critique of Manu, because Ambedkar in 20th century was the one person who presented a critique of Manu very vociferously. Then this is another one, which is the Dalit pissing on Manu, which shows the rejection of Manu by the untouchable community. Now, I move on to a very different example. Now, this is the image of Dhanvantari at the residence of Vice Chancellor MS University Baroda. And Dhanvantari is always eulogized as the propagator or the originator of Ayurveda. Now, interestingly, Dhanvantari is form of Vishnu, is the avatar of Vishnu, one of the emanation of Vishnu. Now, Ram has absolutely no historical value, absolutely has no historical existence. There is not a single evidence which proves the historicity of Rama. But even then, the Brahminical cultural nationalism and the Brahminical thought process would like to reimpose all the time that it was a historical reality. Another example is author of Ramayana as Valmiki, who has been given appellation of untouchable despite the author in the Ramayana claims to be the 10th son of the Pracheta, who was a Brahmin. In another section, it is also mentioned that Valmiki was son of Pracheta sage. And he says that I am a son of a Bharadvaj Brahmin. That is what the Valmiki says in Ramayana itself. It shows the author was not from the Shudra Varna, but the 20th century systematically made the author to be untouchable. And that happened in Punjab. Then another example is Sudarshan Samaj, like the sweeper community in India. They are always affiliated as, or always told as, oh, you are Sudarshan Samaj, and they are linked with the sage Sudarshan of Mahabharata. Now, sage Sudarshan of Mahabharata has nothing to do with the sweeper communities. Let me tell you, if you read the myth, nothing of that sort exists. So that is how these mythic narratives as historical realities are being propagated. Now, these are the shlokas which I don't want to recite. The postcolonial theories and postmodern theoretical paradigms has attempted to analyze the phenomenon of hegemony and presented its critique very intensely. Nevertheless, while attempting to critique colonialism as an agency of outside institution of dominance, the internal hegemonic systemic functioning is never criticized. Why such dichotomy exists? Dichotomy in their understanding exists because their formulations are directed to maintain their own positions and hierarchy in the contemporary society. Thus, informed ignorance becomes an integral part of the claimed postcolonial artists as well as of intellectuals who are involved in the knowledge production process, where the presence of divinity, hegemony, is fundamentally a protected entity. Now, great Homi Bhabha, who talks about hybridity. Now, can hybridity be attributed to the colonial India? Was there not hybridity before colonial India? India has been a multi-ethnic, multicultural society. So, hybridity was existing right from proto-historic times, let me tell you. So, this becomes a very wrong conception, very wrong assumption. Then, Homi Bhabha talks about remembrance as an idea of introspection and retrospection. Yes, it is true. Retrospection is a process where you go and recall each and every event that happened in your life. But introspection is a serious process. And do Indians really introspect? Has there been an element of introspection, probably we would not have witnessed violence on the women. Probably the violence, the rapes would have been reduced. Probably the cheating, the chidimari would have been reduced. Probably the people would have become more self-responsive. Probably the caste violence would have been reduced. But nothing of that sort happens. So the element of introspection doesn't exist in the minds of Indians as well as among the intellectuals in the country. Then this uncanny, the phrase he uses, which he derives from Freudian terms and then makes very different kind of an interpretation. So it says it is a monstrous doubling. The question is, who is creating this monstrous doubling and why it is happening? Who are the people, who are getting benefited by these ruptures and the binaries? Now that particular element, Homi Bhabha is completely silent. Because the objective of the knowledge formation process is not that to ward off the ignorances and to make the reader or a person to be a self-responsive. But the objective is to maintain the hegemony. Such assemblage of knowledge production needs to be questioned as to what are their objective formulations. Transmission of self-introspective critical tool remains untouched as protected ignorance is a vehicle of age-old hegemony that is diligently maintained and never allowed to become part of critical analysis. Now I move on to the question of subaltern. It's so problematic. Like 8, 9, 10 volumes have been produced. There is no mentioning of scheduled caste and the scheduled tribes. It's very ironic, very, very ironic. Then everything becomes subaltern. How can everything become subaltern? Because if you go even by the definition of Gramsci, the term gets evolved by Gramsci, and Gramsci makes it very clear the one who is a powerless has no access to resources and has no say, has no voice. That is the kind of a definition which Gramsci puts. And if you read Gramsci's writings, you will notice that Gramsci was very critical of Gandhi. Whereas the followers of Gramsci, the claim subalternist and the post-colonialist, are celebrative of Gandhi. See the contradictions between the two. Then, moreover, how do you really make use of this term subaltern, or how do you really understand this whole process of subaltern? Because it becomes very, very difficult. Why I say so? Because in India, we have a caste society, and Ambedkar defines caste not only as division of labor, but also division of laborers. The appellation of division of laborers, appellation of subaltern does not empower you to understand the experiences of division of laborers. So that one has to be very, very clear while understanding the society and using these terms. Then I come to hegemony. Yes, hegemony needs to be criticized, no doubt about that. But what about internal hegemony? What Said has done, Said has used Foucault. And then all these post-colonialists drawing from Said has made a big aura about the so-called theoretical formulations. So this becomes extremely problematic. And therefore, like the native hegemony, what you realize is that even in the post-colonialists, the native hegemony does not get critiqued. And why it does not get critiqued? Because they are the beneficiaries of those hegemony. That one has to really understand. Then, can subalterns speak? Which is a famous argument by Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. At least the Ambedkarite movement in Maharashtra gives you a very different idea of all those things, because it's a direct representation. So you are not being represented by someone, but you are representing your own self. And what it has created the body of literature, which is very different. It has created alternative cultural practices. So the it is not all about having a space for articulation, but it is all about having the power of articulation. So this becomes a very, very different formulations. Then post-colonialism can be seen as theoretical resistance to, thank you, to to mystifying amnesia of the colonial aftermath. This is what Leela Gandhi observed. Do you think that it is colonialism which has created this amnesia? That's a real question which one has to ask. What about the wiping out of Buddhist past, Buddhist memory from the minds of the Indians? What about that? Has it been done by the colonials, or has it been done by the Brahmanical thought process? So one has to question those things with the solid evidences. Then Akhil Belgrami's love for Gandhi ethics. How Gandhi can be a persona of ethical moral behavior? There are so many contradictions in Gandhi. But even then, you do not want to see the things very critically and wish to be part of the project of protected ignorance. It shows considerable difference and offers an invitation to be radically different from the nationalistic poetic imaginations, class-centric projections, as well as acclaimed post-colonial interventions. It can be critiqued by the idea of dependent originations as it is deeply connected with the facets of mind where functioning is to maintain ignorance, whereas the critical framework of dependent or interdependent origination, philosophical pursuits are to kill such ignorance and make people more responsive to their own self. Knowledge as an important tool that needs to be righteous, to be perfect, with the theoretical domain of the dependent origination, that is Buddha's Pratitya Samutpad. Deleuze's idea of becoming is being debated in the postmodern philosophy. Now let me tell you, the idea of presupposition does not exist in the Buddhist philosophy. And Buddhist philosophy is the only philosophy where the idea of presupposition does not exist. Taking cue from the Buddhist philosophy, the postmodern philosophy also does not have the idea of presuppositions. Rather, it critically dismantles these presuppositions and dismantles the center. But what is happening in India is that the claimed postmodernist and acclaimed postmodernist, instead of dismantling the center, they are re-legitimizing the center. That becomes a big problem. So Deleuze's idea of becoming is being debated in the postmodernist philosophy. Dr. Ambedkar, in his seminal essay on Buddha or Karl Marx, observes, while summing up the ideas of Buddhism, writes, nothing is permanent or sanatan. Everything is subject to change. Being is always becoming. And here I would like to evoke Rancière's idea of aesthetic discontents, where he maintains that politics of aesthetics are aesthetics as politics. These are the modes of doing and modes of being. These are the important intervening tools which Rancière puts and changes the conceptions of aesthetics, where he sees politics as very fundamental idea of representation. So not that image merely as the only objective of the representation, but even the non-objective works also have equal ideas embedded in its politics of representations. He says heterogeneous singularity of artistic forms are one that commands a sense of community, but this is a community which builds itself on the ruining of perspectives for political emancipation to which modern art was able to link up. It is an ethical community which revokes every project to collective emancipation. What is important to understand? Gratification, indulgence, the category of self that cannot be defined without analyzing non-self. Articulating multiplicities in meanings and understanding of phenomenon changing conception of political readings have immensely changed our thoughtful sensorial world. Nothing is permanent and everything is changing is indicative of the momentary realism and changing nature of physical space and mental space. It does not mean that interdependence denies the very existence of being. Rather, it simply opens up the ideas of change, that there is always a change and nothing remains static. The political sphere has drawn boundaries and limitations. Our ideas are controlled by our political sphere readings, and creating monologues of spirituality and homogeneity become project of protected ignorance. To keep on saying, oh, we are a spiritual nation, it's all part of protected ignorance, so that you cannot think beyond spirituality. So your entire thought process gets governed by the idea of Brahma and Parabrahma. So you cannot become a rational being. It's very simple. It's very clear. Like at the time of launching a satellite, can you imagine the ISRO scientist, the chief goes to the Tirumal Tirupati Devasthanam. What for? Or even for that matter, to start a diesel engine, you have to put a vermilion tika over there. What it is for, what it shows. So these are all part of the protected ignorances. Now I move on to this structured thought process, and its evolving process is gradually tending towards the imposed paradigm of global. Global is new class of modernity, but their spaces gets deeply structured within the praxis of class, conveniently bypassing the intricacies and the issues of consciousness. Like I see this whole idea of global art more in terms of materiality of material rather than generating any kind of a consciousness. Thus, mind consciousness and its multiplicities has to come out of the conditionality and has to be autonomous, an enabling process not only to understand the phenomenon of the happening around, but also to investigate the self, to locate oneself, and the interpretative realm to interrogate the protected ignorance. Seeds of stored consciousness may create hindrance to enabling process, and therefore even rightness still in its relative process acts as a domain to enter into the process of rupture and binaries that also are intentional in nature and never in its universal terms, but more are located in its physical and mental spheres. Thank you.